For over 10,000 cycles, the Galactic Council stood as the unchallenged axis of civilization. From the twin stars of Varith to the gas-ringed moons of Selyon Prime. Their influence extended across every known system, threading through the stars like a vast neural network of control. Dozens of sentient species had risen and fallen beneath their banner. The Council did not rule through open war or tyranny. It ruled through certainty, by shaping laws, manipulating trade, and rewriting the very definition of progress. At the Council's core were the ancient long-lived species whose evolution had stretched into the eons. Their cultures had calcified into a quiet arrogance, built on data models, predicted outcomes, and the rigid belief that all things in the universe followed a pattern. Civilizations emerged, grew, and if lucky, were permitted to integrate into the great hierarchy, a slow climb approved and monitored step by step, advancement never too fast, never too independent. Every new species that reached faster than light travel was greeted not with celebration, but with oversight. Surveillance drones, diplomatic envoys, technology stabilization teams, a quiet armada of subtle domination. The Council called this benevolent stewardship. Others called it what it truly was, containment in the upper chamber of the Council. Spire, where ancient lights glowed from walls built of living crystal. The species that considered themselves masters of the galaxy convened with ritual precision. They spoke in tones of protocol and precedent, debating the resources of minor worlds, correcting the philosophical errors of developing species, and managing peace through carefully orchestrated stagnation. It had worked for millennia. They had predicted every anomaly, absorbed every challenge, and refined a system so tightly wound that even rebellion had become a manageable variable until now, out in the dark. Reaches beyond surveyed space, something stirred, not a military incursion, not a rogue faction, a ripple, an anomaly moving faster than expected, a signal with unfamiliar encryption. Star charts were changing not because new planets were discovered, but because entire systems were being quietly visited, mapped, and then ignored. As if someone was analyzing the galaxy, not exploring it. They watched. They ran simulations. The models gave no consistent prediction. Uncertainty had returned, and with it, a whisper circulating through the lower echelons of the science guilds. Among the intelligence castes, even within the usually indifferent observer species, a name. A species no one in the Council had heard of before. Humans. Unknown origin. Unregistered in galactic databanks. No Council-guided uplift. No treaties. No archives. Nothing. Yet they were here moving fast, adapting faster, bypassing protocols, ignoring contact requests. As if the rules did not apply to them, the Council's first reaction was curiosity. Their second was fear. The Council had never experienced true first contact in centuries. By the time any new species reached interstellar capability, the Council's soft influence had already shaped them either through seeded artifacts, long-range psychic monitoring, or cultural implants delivered by stealth. Even the brightest civilizations were mere echoes of the ancients' blueprint. But this was different. The humans appeared without warning, no gradual development, no monitored rise through primitive technologies. One day, deep-range probes detected a distortion field near Sector Row 39. The next, an entire system previously uninhabited had been terraformed, surveyed, and marked with strange metallic beacons broadcasting in languages never cataloged. Within one cycle, 3 more systems showed similar activity. The humans weren't arriving, they were already here. The Council convened an emergency assembly, rare, but not unheard of. In the Grand Hall of Concordance, voices that hadn't debated face-to-face in centuries emerged from their long-distance hibernation chambers. The Elders of Veluin, the Lightbinders of Trellis, the harmonic intelligences of the Christery, all gathered, all unsettled. It's not panicked, but deeply disturbed by the implications. Have they responded to the contact pings? One elder rasped, double quotes, no. Not to level 1, 2, or even high diplomacy, priority transmissions, responded a Christery echo form. We've shifted through over 30,000 language constructs, They continue broadcasting only their own. A third voice, cold, crystalline, asked, "Do we know their hierarchy structure? Their governing council? Have they declared intentions?" A low-ranking xenolinguist answered from the shadows, "They haven't issued any formal declarations. Their transmissions don't follow council diplomatic patterns, but we've begun partial translation of their symbol stream." One phrase repeats with irregular frequency. The chamber fell silent. The technician continued, "We are not here to be governed." Some dismissed it as posturing. Others feared defiance. But most simply couldn't believe the underlying truth. A species had reached interstellar travel without council oversight and now openly ignored their authority. The decision was made to initiate direct contact. A diplomatic vessel, marked with universal insignia and staffed with 30 interspecies envoys, was dispatched to the nearest human-claimed system. The mission, peaceful initiation, assessment, and, if necessary, containment protocols. The ship arrived at the edge of the human colony zone. Almost immediately it was scanned. The Council expected the usual delay. New civilizations. It's typically required weeks to decrypt even basic Council communication bands. But this time, humans replied within minutes. Their message was simple. Polite, clear, you are within controlled space. State your purpose and identify affiliation. Controlled space. The Council envoy responded with full diplomatic clarity, invoking interstellar law, Council primacy, and an invitation for cooperation. They expected confusion, reverence, or perhaps resentment masked by cautious curiosity. Instead, they were greeted by a live human representative. Not a warlord, not a high priest, just a speaker. No title, no rituals. The being looked unassuming, almost underwhelming by alien standards. No bioluminescence, no shifting forms, no ornate voice harmonics. But the words spoken through the translator carried weight beyond form. "We recognize your organization. We're aware of your governance structure. We do not consent to integration. We wish for peaceful coexistence, but will not accept oversight." The Council envoys exchanged stunned glances. This was not naivety. This was not ignorance of the political web they were entering. It was a deliberate rejection still. The humans offered no threats. No weapons were displayed. No ultimatum issued. Just calm, calculated clarity backed by infrastructure. Advanced orbital platforms, yet data systems running in code unfamiliar even to the Council's best decryption minds. The diplomatic vessel returned, mission incomplete, and for the first time in remembered history, the Galactic Council had been told no. The elders debated endlessly. Was this a test? A bluff? Could the humans be coerced or guided more gently? Had they simply evolved? In secret beyond Council censors, or worse. Had the galaxy produced a rival? They needed answers, and soon. Because if the humans weren't bluffing, then everything the Council had built, every balance of power, every subtle manipulation, might be at risk. But the next move would not be diplomatic. It would be strategic. Asterisk the Council had made. A critical error, though. In their arrogance, they would not recognize it as such. Not yet, for cycles uncounted. Their dominance had remained unchallenged, not because of overwhelming force, but because of a belief held by every species under their umbrella, and most dangerously, by the Council themselves, that no emerging civilization could possibly match the ancients in capability, sophistication, or resolve. So when humanity declined to submit, the Council did what they always did. They began to tighten the invisible noose. It started with information denial. Relay buoys that carried galactic data streams were redirected or reprogrammed to omit navigational updates near human systems. Trade convoys were delayed. Stations along border systems were suddenly flooded with security inspections. Neutral outposts were warned, quietly but firmly, that assisting or trading with the newcomers might be considered a breach of Council protocols. It was an old strategy. Effective, subtle, lethal in the long run. But this time, something unexpected happened. The humans noticed. Worse, they understood. Council analysts were baffled. Within mere weeks, human colonies rerouted their supply chains through unsanctioned wormholes, natural ones, long ignored due to instability. Somehow, the humans had mapped and stabilized them. Communications blackouts? Irrelevant? The humans began deploying their own data relays, compact, fast, quantum sensed arrays that piggybacked off gravitational waves instead of standard hyperpulse bands. Economic pressure? Useless. Human colonies were self-sufficient to a degree that most council members found ... unsettling. Terraforming tech decades ahead of predicted timelines. Hydroponic arcologies that could feed planetary populations. Energy systems that emitted zero detectable radiation leakage. And then came the first true shock. The disappearance of Outpost 7 Carnies, a small, unmanned listening post located near a system the humans had recently surveyed. One day it was transmitting. The next, nothing. Council recovery drones arrived 2 days later. They found ... nothing. No debris, no heat signatures, no evidence of destruction. Just an empty orbital trajectory. And a single metallic beacon floating silently where the station had once been. Etched into its surface was a message, in clear, translatable glyphs. Respect boundaries. We seek no war. The council tried to contain the event. Internally, theories bloomed like mold in the corners of dark meeting halls. A show of power, said some. A warning, muttered others. A bluff, insisted the military caste. The prevailing decision? Escalate quietly. A covert fleet was assembled. No grand armada, just a precision strike group of stealth-enabled vessels equipped with the best in council technology. The mission: probe the edge of human space, test their response, map their defensive capabilities, and if possible, disable a forward base to send a message. They never returned. No distress signal. No last broadcast. No telemetry spike. Nothing. Just silence. 3 days later, simple package arrived, transmitted through standard diplomatic channels. It contained the command logs of the entire Council fleet flight paths. Internal conversations, targeting data recorded not from the ship's systems, but seemingly from an external perspective. As if the humans had been watching every move from the start, there was no accompanying threat, no demands. Only a short message appended at the end of the file. Please do not attempt that again. That line echoed through council chambers like a thunderclap in a vacuum. The data was verified. The logs were real. Panic, though unspoken, crept in like frost under a closed door. Council predictive models so trusted for generations had failed. Every scenario had ended in either human capitulation or prolonged but inevitable integration. Not one model had accounted for this outcome. Unassailable restraint. Humanity had seen the threat, neutralized it completely, and then returned the evidence. With a note that felt less like a warning and more like a disappointed sigh, this was not a species scrambling to defend itself. This was not a child lashing out in fear. This was something the Council had never faced before. A civilization that didn't need the Council. Didn't fear its hand. Worse, didn't want its throne. And that made them the most dangerous entity the galaxy had ever known. Asterisk, the Council was not used to warnings, least of all ones they received, rather than issued. To those who sat upon the crystalline seats of the High Hall, the human message, please do not attempt that again, was an affront. Not because of its wording, it was in fact polite, almost courteous. But it wasn't the message that enraged them. It was the implication: you cannot touch us. You tried. Shh, stop. And worse still, the humans had proven it without firing a shot. Yet even in the face of this display, most within the Council could not bring themselves to acknowledge what it meant. Denial is a powerful drug, especially when it's all that stands between arrogance and extinction. And so, as they had done with every past anomaly, they turned inward. They debated. They bickered. Committees were formed. Committees, review panels, task forces. All while pretending control had not already slipped through their fingers. Some factions began to fracture. The younger members of the Council species, with shorter generational cycles, were more adaptably and therefore more afraid. They whispered inside corridors about what the humans might do next, what they could do if provoked further. Others, particularly the oldest and most established species, held firm. "We have faced rebellions before," they hissed. "This is a flare. It will fade." But in the shadows of policy and posturing, one voice stood apart. A single counselor, relatively young by elder standards, stepped forward during a rare full audience gathering. It was from a minor species, one whose homeworld had barely survived its own induction into the council centuries ago. He spoke plainly. "We are no longer the dominant power in this galaxy. Humanity has arrived, and we must adapt or be replaced." The chamber turned to ice. The accusation was not just treasonous, it was sacrilege. He was silenced, his words stricken from the official archive, his position revoked by a near unanimous vote. Within days, he had vanished from public record altogether, reassigned to an observation post in a quiet system on the galactic fringe. The Council called this diplomacy. The humans would call it weakness. Behind the scenes, military leaders moved quickly. If diplomacy was failing, they reasoned, then perhaps a controlled engagement could realign the balance. It's not war, just a show of strength, a reminder of where power truly resided. A new operation was devised under the name Project Eclipse. 3 capital-class cruisers, 6 stealth frigates. A series of drone swarms were sent toward a small human frontier colony barely a few decades old, remote, quiet, and seemingly vulnerable. The mission objective: disable communications, perform a limited strike, then retreat. The goal wasn't conquest, it was theater. Symbolism. Make the humans hesitate. What arrived in the system was not resistance. What arrived was silence. No planetary shields, no military presence, not even orbital patrols. Emboldened, the lead cruiser began its approach. That was when the stars themselves shifted. At first, the fleet thought it was a sensor error, like lens flare, a magnetic distortion. Then the shadow moved. From behind the colonies, Moon, a shape emerged, angular, seamless, and impossibly massive. It was not built like any council ship, no visible engines, no weapon ports, no signal trails, just a quiet black silhouette drifting forward on gravitational control systems so precise. Even the vacuum itself seemed hesitant to resist. The human vessel did not broadcast a warning. It didn't need to. Each council ship in the fleet lost power in sequence like candles extinguished by a silent breeze. Systems shut down. Weapons went offline. Life support, navigation, communications, all paralyzed. And yet no harm came to the crew. No deaths, no injuries. They simply floated there, helpless witnesses then. Without ceremony, their systems flickered back online, all except their weapons. A single signal was transmitted, encrypted in the exact language system the Council had used to initiate contact months before. "This is your final lesson. We do not retaliate, we prevent." The fleet limped back to Council space. Shame was too mild a word. This wasn't a defeat. It wasn't even a confrontation. It was a demonstration. Back on the Council homeworld, panic was no longer a whisper. It was a roar. Member species demanded answers. Civil unrest brewed in systems long thought stable. Trade alliances began forming outside of Council sanction. Independent factions proposed treaties with the humans directly, quietly, cautiously, and in defiance of central law. The Council issued warnings. They were ignored. The very structure that had governed the galaxy for eons began to splinter, not from war, but from doubt. Because now, every species, every world, every leader was asking the same forbidden question. If the Council is not the strongest power in the galaxy, then who are they really? And more importantly, why should anyone listen to them anymore? The Council had long believed that order was born from obedience. Their laws, or systems, their carefully controlled progressions, they were all tools to ensure that no civilization rose too quickly, no power shifted too suddenly, and no species ever became too independent. The galaxy, in their eyes, was a garden. They were its gardeners. Every new life form a seed to be pruned, guided, or if necessary, culled. But now, standing at the edge of a new reality, the gardeners had discovered a species that didn't grow in neat rows. Humanity was wild, rooted in chaos, grown in hardship, and worst of all, they had flourished without permission. The failed fleet operation had shattered more than just ships. It had broken illusions. The once uncheckable belief in council infallibility was dissolving like vapor in a solar wind. Even within the High Hall, voices once silenced by tradition were beginning to rise. And so, reluctantly, the council chose diplomacy once more, not out of wisdom, but necessity. They extended a formal invitation to humanity, not to join the council, not yet, but to meet, to speak, to explain themselves. This time, the humans accepted. The meeting was held aboard the Equinox, a neutral orbital station suspended in the gravitational balance between two dead stars. The location had symbolic meaning, chosen for its lack of planetary influence, its sterile neutrality. The council hoped it would project control, but as the human envoy ship docks Leak, it's quiet and larger than any council vessel present, it became clear the illusion of control had already passed. No escort, no weapons, systems active, no threats. Yet the human ship's surface shimmered with layered alloys the council could not identify. Its presence alone was unsettling, not because of its power, but because it wasn't trying to be intimidating. It simply was. The human delegation entered the chamber without guards, without ceremony. 5 individuals, varied in age and background, walked calmly into a room filled with beings who had shaped the stars for millennia. They wore no armor, carried no weapons, just simple clothing, streamlined and functional. Their expressions? Measured. Curious, not defiant, not arrogant just ... confident. And then they spoke. There was no demand, no apology, no claim to dominion. What they offered was far more dangerous, understanding. "We are not your enemy," said the lead human, an older man, voice steady and calm. "Hey, we are not here to conquer or submit. We came because it was time. Because that is what life does when it reaches the edge of the known. We met silence in the stars, and we chose to answer it." A silence fell across the chamber. The council high speaker, whose voice had opened negotiations with hundreds of species, found his words slow and hollow in response. "You ... bypassed protocol," he said, almost bitterly. "You ignored the pathways of integration, the framework of harmony, the order." The human simply nodded. "Yes, we read your frameworks, studied your structures, and then chose not to participate." "Why?" the speaker demanded. The human's eyes softened. "Because we've seen what happens to those who do." A stillness rippled through the chamber like a psychic wave. Some council members bristled. Others looked down. A few nodded faintly. The human continued. "We are not a perfect species. We fought ourselves, nearly ended ourselves. But we learned, and we learned fast. What you call chaos, we call adaptability. What you call disorder, we call freedom. You build your systems to keep the galaxy safe, we build to keep it alive." A second human stepped forward, this one younger, quiet until now. "We know your history," she said. "You believe you brought peace to the stars. But you really brought stillness. You made the galaxy predictable. Efficient, but not better. Not wiser. You removed war, but also wonder. You removed risk, but also reason." A murmur spread across the chamber. The humans were not here to plead their case. They were offering perspective, and the council, for the first time in 1,000 generations, listened. Some protested, of course. They demanded proof of human restraint. They accused the newcomers of subterfuge, of weaponizing diplomacy. One counselor even declared that humanity's refusal to kneel was a sign of inevitable aggression. The human response was simple and final. "If we wanted to rule," the envoy said, "you wouldn't be here. No threats, just truth. A truth backed not by force, but by capability, by choice." And with that, the meeting ended. The humans left as they had arrived, calm, contained, and deliberate. But they didn't leave empty-handed. Dozens of mid-tier species, who had watched the Council's grip tighten for generations, species who had long swallowed their resentment, their frustration, their hope reached out, not with petitions, not with rebellion, but with respect. Humanity had done what none of them could. They had refused to bend, and still stood. It was no longer about weapons or fleets or policy. It was about example, and that was the moment the Council lost its hold, not in war, but in hearts. The turning point had come. Not with an invasion, but with an idea. Asterisk, the fracture was silent at first. No declarations of war, no galactic rebellions, no grand spectacle, just change. It began with the Outer Rim species civilizations. Long held at the margins of Council attention, they had always been tolerated, never trusted, monitored, taxed, instructed, and restrained. When humanity refused to bend, the Outer Rim listened. When humanity stood unshaken after the Council's fleet vanished without retaliation, they watched. And when humanity met the Council face to face and chose dialogue over dominance, they understood. Here was proof that power didn't have to corrupt. That strength didn't demand submission. That freedom, real freedom, was possible without becoming the monster you feared. The cracks widened. On trade worlds, minor guilds began rerouting shipments through human-aligned relay stations, a move once unthinkable, bypassing the Council's sacred trade grid. But the human lanes were faster, safer, no corruption, no bribes, no tangle of outdated tariffs and enforced interspecies hierarchies. The Council demanded answers. The trade guilds replied, "Prefer efficiency." In research, colonies' brilliant minds, once exiled for unorthodox theories, began to emerge again. Quiet conversations passed between hidden labs and human scientific liaisons. In weeks, data flowed freely, experiments accelerated, barriers lifted. A generation of thinkers, once shackled by the Council's obsession with predictability, now dreamed again. They weren't defecting, they were evolving. The collapse didn't come from one decisive blow. It came from 1,000 small shifts. It's like ice cracking under too much weight. But the Council didn't sit idle. Some of the elder species, the ones who had sat on the High Hall's throne since before written language, called for intervention. They masked their fear in righteousness. To them, the galaxy was unraveling. And like all old empires, they believed the answer was force. A coalition was formed in secret, fleets from 12 Council-loyal systems. Their mission wasn't to attack Earth directly, no. That would be too visible, too reckless. Instead, they would strike at the colonies, the human frontier settlements, the outposts far from Sol's warm glow. The plan was elegant in its cruelty. Make an example without appearing the aggressor. But they never reached their targets because the humans were already there. The Coalition's first fleet arrived in the Albaran Corridor, quiet system with 2 terraformed moons and a single refueling station. The strike was timed for orbital night. Stealth units engaged, and then ... everything stopped. Not figuratively, literally. In mid-flight, tire ships froze in space. Their engines blinked out. Their crew floated helplessly, not dead, but suspended in time by a field no Council species had ever encountered. Every molecule of their ships locked in a state of quantum stasis. The effect lasted 6 minutes and 17 seconds. Then, slowly, everything resumed exactly where it had left off. The Council ships found themselves surrounded, not by weapons, but by silence. A single transmission was received on every band. In every language, this was your last chance to choose reason. Do not take another step. The fleet turned back. Word spread. No shots fired, no deaths, but something fundamental had shifted. Fear. Not fear of destruction. Humanity had shown no desire to annihilate. It was the fear of irrelevance, the Council's moral foundation crumbled next. For ages, their authority had been cloaked in the idea that they were protectors, that without their structure, the galaxy would descend into chaos. But now, Across hundreds of systems, civilizations were beginning to realize a dangerous truth. The chaos wasn't coming from freedom, it was coming from control. Species once stifled by bureaucracy are now trading freely with human outposts. Cultural exchanges bloomed. Music, art, science, the very diversity, the AE. Council, once suppressed in the name of harmony, was flourishing in humanity's shadow. And through it all, the humans did something no empire in recorded history had ever done. They didn't declare a new order. They offered a choice. From a new station orbiting the core world of Azald built, in record time, with help from nearly 30 different species, humanity broadcast a message to the galaxy. Not encrypted. Not hidden. Just ... shared. It wasn't a manifesto. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't even a set of laws. It was an invitation. We are not building an empire. We are building a network. Not one ruled by force, but by trust. You may join us. You may not. You may watch, or lead, or leave. We won't ask for tribute. We won't demand obedience. All we ask is that you treat each other with dignity, and that you grow. That was the moment everything truly changed. The council did not fall with an explosion. It fell with a choice unchosen. Dozens of species walked away, quietly, decisively. Not in rebellion, but in realization. The council still exists, but now presides over a shrinking corner of the galaxy, while the rest flows outward. Into something new, something shaped not by fear, but by hope, and behind it all guiding. Not ruling was humanity. The species no one saw coming. The species that rewrote the rules, not with conquest, but with clarity. Asterisk. The galaxy didn't notice the sunrise all at once. No alarms went off. No borders were redrawn in fire. There were no victory parades, no planetary broadcasts declaring triumph. The council wasn't toppled with thunder. It simply became irrelevant. And in its place, a new light spread from world to world, station to station. Signal to signal, the signs of change began to flicker, like stars awakening after a long sleep in the Andreal Drift. A species once classified as non-cooperative was broadcasting scientific data in open format, collaborating with humans on gravitational lensing experiments once banned under Council intellectual property laws. On Varix 3, once home to Council-sanctioned mining colonies, native life was being protected and restored not by rebellion, but by agreement. Human environmental engineers partnered with locals, helping them reverse centuries of slow, ecological ruin. And on Galen's Ring, once the most surveilled trade nexus in the quadrant, a monument was unveiled not to honor a war or a hero, but to commemorate the first time in memory that thousands of species stood beside each other as equals, not subjects. It wasn't just a political shift. It was a cultural awakening. The network, as it came to be called, wasn't a government. It didn't issue mandates or currencies or declarations. It was an open-source alliance, a framework of shared values, trust, and decentralized cooperation. It's built not on force, but choice, and at its quiet center, humanity. They had not claimed leadership. They never declared themselves saviors. In fact, most of the time, they were not even present in the public spotlight. But everywhere one looked, every treaty signed without coercion, every trade lane reopened without tribute, every research project shared without restriction, there was the unmistakable fingerprint of a species that had learned the hard way what power could do, and had chosen restraint instead. Some species still resisted. Some clung to the old ways. Fear is not easily excised. Few loyalist systems even tried to revive council edicts, border patrols, tariffs, protective sanctions. But their broadcasts went unanswered. Their demands unheard. Not because they were blocked, but because no one was listening anymore. Even those who had once feared the council's retaliation now looked toward humanity's network for stability. The tide had shifted not through domination, but by offering a better path. And in time, even those who had cursed the change came to see its beauty. One by one, former enforcers became explorers. Former subjects became partners. And the lines that once carved the galaxy into rulers and ruled faded into starlight. It wasn't perfect. Disputes still arose. Misunderstandings still flared. But now there was room for conversation, not suppression. Growth, not stagnation. The old empires had demanded silence. The new order encouraged questions. On a quiet moon orbiting a blue-white star near the edge of charted space, an elderly human sat on a balcony overlooking a still-growing city one. Built by dozens of species in dozens of styles, using dozens of languages. Below, children played in artificial gravity gardens, some with fur, some with feathers, some with scales, and some with skin. None of them cared who once ruled the stars. They only knew they were free. The elder closed his eyes and smiled. This wasn't the empire. Humans had been warned not to build. This was the world they chose to make. A galaxy not ruled, but awakened. A dawn that didn't come with conquest, but with contact, and in the centuries to come, when historians from every species would trace the turning of the age, they would all agree on one thing. The galaxy did not change. When the council fell, it changed when humanity arrived.